Some people will be removed from the meeting.
Removed from the meeting. Are you seeing everybody like normally?
Now, well, let's see. I don't know how many participants there are here.
13.
13. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I see, yeah, and me is 13. Yeah.
Okay.
So I do. But for a second, it disappeared, that window.
Something's
Okay.
funky today. It's all acting strange today.
Yes. All right. Okay. Apologies. What can we do? So it's been a little break. We had a little break. Did people go to that Amsterdam tour? A couple of people.
So sorry I missed it. So sad.
Yes, I did.
It was wonderful.
Yes, I did.
Hopefully, was it all right?
Yes, great.
Interesting.
Good.
It's okay.
Good. All right. So we have a range of opinion here. Good. So that's the way it should be. Good. Anyway, so now we're back in business. So we are at page 5A1, and hopefully everybody has the text available. Right at the very, very beginning of page 5 in Megillah. And if we remember, we've been talking all this time about various ways of shifting the reading of the Megillah to different dates. And does it go, to this date, to that date, and then what's the status of reading it on a different date, and so on and so forth. And now we're going to get into an issue that has, that has relevance to that question, but it has its own importance as well. So this is 4 lines from the top on the left-hand column, where it says the Gemara discusses whether. Okay, that's what we're up to. Will somebody do us the honor of reading that paragraph out loud, please? Who's going to do that? Beryl, thank you. Oh, look at that nice background you got.
Can you hear me is the question, or the birds overtaking
Where's the bear?
Okay.
Where's the bear?
Gemara the bear is an indoor bear.
Oh.
He doesn't come outside.
All right.
The Gemara discusses whether the presence of 10 people is required when the Megillah is read. Rav said, when the Megillah is read in its proper time, i.e. the 14th of Adar for unwalled towns and the 15th for walled cities, it is read even privately. But when it is read in a time other than its proper time, it is read with 10 people in attendance. Rabbi Yassi says, whether the Megillah is read in its proper time or not in its proper time, it is read with 10 people in attendance. In an actual case, when the Megillah was to be read in its proper time, Rav was concerned to fulfill the ruling of Rav Asi. He went out and gathered 10 people.
Okay. So now we have a discussion. Do you need a minyan for reading Megillah? And what Rav says is, well, it depends. It depends when you're reading Megillah, since we've had this whole long discussion about which day of the week and which date of the month you might end up reading the Megillah. So let's think about it this way. When Megillah is read on its proper day, the official day for reading the Megillah is the 14th and the 15th. Walled cities on the 15th, everybody else on the 14th, right? In a perfect world, everybody's reading on the 14th. So in such a case, it's read even individually. I wouldn't translate this as even privately. I would say individually. If you have an individual who's can't get to shul and listen to Megillah in the minyan, okay, but you still have to read it. So read it on your own. Read it individually. So when it's when Purim is really Purim, everybody has an individual responsibility to hear Megillah. Either you hear it by listening to somebody else read it, and a lot of people are listening also, or you read it on your own. So that's Rav's first statement. And then his second statement is, however, if Megillah reading has been pushed off of the proper date, if Megillah reading is put onto the 11th of Adar or the 12th or the 13th, when you're not reading Megillah on the real date of Purim itself, then the Megillah reading needs a minyan. Then it needs a minyan. So what's the thinking here? Okay, so let's look at footnote number 3.
The rationale for this distinction is as follows. On the proper date, since everyone is involved in the reading of the Megillah, publicity of the miracle is achieved without the presence of 10 people at each reading.
Okay, so
However,
let's remember, one second, thank you. Wait. Let's remember that this is a major factor, this is a major value of what the reading of the Megillah was actually instituted for. The reading of the Megillah was instituted to publicize the miracle, Pirsume Nisa, just as we also instituted lighting Hanukkah candles for Hanukkah. This is the way, not only do we make the miracle, we're happy that that the miracle took place, but actually we want to spread the word. We want to publicize the miracle. So, says Rav, when it's a regular Purim and the whole town is busy with celebrating Purim, so the miracle is indeed publicized. The miracle is indeed out there for everybody. So then each individual has their own individual obligation, right? But, however, now please continue.
Tersi even notes that Rashi's explanation...
Wait. Start. No, please. I interrupted you in the middle of that paragraph. However, when the Megillah.
Okay.
In the middle of the first paragraph.
However, when the Megillah is read in an irregular time, since only a portion of the public is involved with the Megillah reading, publicity of the miracle is not achieved unless 10 people are present.
Okay, so that's it. So we're not going to go into the next two paragraphs. The next two paragraphs, they ask a question, but sometimes everybody is actually reading it on a different day. The answer is yes, but a lot of times not everybody is reading it on a regular day. So that's we're gonna leave those little details for those of you who want to read those paragraphs some other time. But that's the major explanation is that it's about Pirsume Nisa. It's about publicizing the miracle. When everybody is aware that Purim is here, then the miracle is publicized. So we've taken care of that. And then the obligation to read the Megillah devolves on each and every one of us. In the other case, where some people are having their own separate Purim, then we need to make sure that the publicizing of the miracle takes place successfully. We can't take it for granted. And we publicize the miracle with a minyan. This idea of a requirement for a minyan here is therefore not quite the same thing as our usual requirement for a minyan, right? The usual requirement for a minyan is something a little bit different. Who would try to venture to make some kind of a distinction here between the requirement for a minyan in Rav's statement versus a requirement for a minyan, for instance, for reading the Torah? We don't read the Torah when there's no minyan.
I don't know.
Okay, so what I would suggest is, and of course this is something that we're constantly dealing with these days when we have social distancing and when we have problems of gathering groups of people together. We can't gather groups of people together the way we normally would want to, and we don't have a minyan, and therefore we have certain things in our prayers that we don't recite. And Torah reading, for instance, is an obvious element of our services that we don't have, even if we do recite our prayers. The distinction is that the minyan, in our usual approach throughout the year, is about constituting a community per se, a sacred community. if anybody had a chance to read the note that went out that I
Yeah.
sent to the community it was published in Shomrei Week.
Yeah.
This is what it called Kehila Kedosha, a sacred community. Kehila, community, a congregation. Kedosha, holy. Right? If you drive by one day, the front on Park Street, the front of our shul property, and there's a kind of a monument sign that tells people that it's Shomrei Emunah, and it says Kuf Kehila Kedosha, the sacred community, the holy community of Shomrei Emunah. Right? In English, we just say congregation, but actually, literally, is the holy congregation of Shomrei Emunah. So a minyan is the physical, personal, human way to create a sacred congregation. And 3 is a crowd. We talked about that a little bit in Pirkei Avot. But 10 is a congregation. And 9 is not a congregation. So the requirement for a minyan is to constitute oneself as a community. You need 10 people. Once you are a sacred community, the sacred community engages in certain actions as a community that individuals can't do. So reading Torah in the community is something with a Torah scroll. You can always read Torah you take an Eitz Chaim Chumash, you go online, you're studying Torah is something that everybody is supposed to be engaged in all the time. But the act of reading the Torah is a community endeavor. The act of sanctifying God's name is a community endeavor. So we recite the Kaddish, not just the mourner's Kaddish. All the Kaddishes are about calling out everyone in the community. Let's all pray for God's great name to be magnified and sanctified. And the whole community answers, yes, as a community, we want that to happen. That's what a Kaddish is. The Kedusha is Nekadesh et Shimcha ba'olam. Let's sanctify God's name in the world, in public. Mekadesh et Shimcha barabim is one of the early blessings that we say in the morning prayers. We want to sanctify God's name in public. Sanctifying God's name is the prerogative, and it's actually not just the prerogative. It's by definition necessary to have a community for that. This is different. This is celebrating and being happy and telling people God has acted in history, Pirsume Nisa, and God created a miracle. And we need to tell that to people in public. That's also, since a public is defined, a community is defined as 10 people, so then we therefore have the ability to publicize the miracle. A public is there when we have 10 people. So,
Rabbi?
Where are we?
I was going to ask, when you started this, what is the source of the concept that you need 10 people?
This is discussed in the various places in the Talmud, and the simplest answer is, I've written about it. We just had this reading last week, yesterday, in the Torah, the notorious tragic story of the spies. The spies were 12, right? One from each tribe went into this land of Israel to see what was going on there. When they came back, they voted 10-2 not to go into the land. And God says, that evil community has turned their back on me. So we have there God calling the 10 people a community. So the tradition then became that 10 is the minimum for a community, and every community ever since has in some way or another actually been constituted to repair the damage done by that original community.
And is there a discussion about not being able to read the Torah, for instance, or
Yeah.
Kaddish
The Talmud says when you have
It's
a
all in
community, you do these things. Yes, and it's in Kiddushin and it's in Brachot and in other places.
So there's nothing in the Torah that, other than the discussion of the spies.
Right. But that's not about liturgy. That's not about, the Torah doesn't talk about congregations coming to pray together,
I
right?
understand.
That's not a biblical discussion, right? This is all afterward.
And was there in the Talmud, is there ever disagreement as to how
Oh.
this number should be handled?
Not really. Not really. There was apparently an opinion, it's not in the Talmud, that some people said 7. Let's use 7 because 7 is such a great number. But that opinion disappeared.
And to further, I just glanced at your article to confess.
It's a good article.
I'm just curious. And you personally feel, I gather, that it has to be a physical gathering?
Yeah, it's in the
And
Talmud.
today, the Talmud didn't predict the internet.
But the Talmud understood that people might hear about things and not be in the same place. And they said, no, you have to be in the same place.
Okay.
Not around the corner in the
Right.
room.
Yes, somebody else wanted to say something.
Actually, I do. How does this? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
How does this situation even arise? People are going to read it on the 14th or the 15th, and if I decide I want to read it tonight, I need to invite 10 people. I mean, read it publicly. I guess that's what it's about. So how does this even arise? Is it a situation perhaps where it's going to be read on the 14th, but not in the evening when people are convened, or I should say, on the 13th in the evening, and it's not when people are convened. So we're just going to maybe do it over breakfast, which isn't the normal time. So I need to have 9 other people. I'm trying to imagine how this even occurs, because everyone's reading it on the 14th.
So we had already a whole discussion. Megillah is read twice.
Yeah.
The night of the 14th and the day of the 14th. The night precedes the day, right? And that's when we have our big to-dos for Purim and so on,
Right.
is the night of the 14th. We read Megillah then, but the obligation is to read it again in the daytime the following day.
Yeah.
Sometime during the day. The easiest thing to do is to do it in the morning at morning minyan. But it could happen anytime. So what happens if you've got a work schedule that doesn't allow you to go to morning minyan, or that doesn't allow you to go Friday in the evening? So what Rav is saying is you have to get a minyan together. So it's like Mohammed. If Mohammed won't go to the minyan, then you have to get a minyan to go to Mohammed. And that happens in plenty of places also. I've over the many years, I've seen plenty of people or invite people to their apartment and say, okay, let's have our own little private minyan for Megillah reading. This way they all, enjoy each other's company. They have their own jokes. They have whatever. So this is happening throughout the ages to this very moment. So it simply means either you got to get yourself to a minyan, get thee to a minyan, and find out where the minyan is. And in some places, minyanim are happening all the time, right? My shul has a minyan at 9:00. That's too late for me. But there's another shul that has a minyan at 7:30. I have to get to that 7:30 minyan, or something like that. It means make sure that you're at a minyan. Get the minyan of, coordinated with you, or you make it your business to get to a minyan. That's what it means.
If you live in Fairbanks where there are only 8 other Jews, you don't read it. How does that work?
So that's a good question. So that's part of the question. How strict is this rule? So now that's where we have Rav Asi. Rav Asi says whether the minyan is read at its proper time or not, we always need a minyan, right? So that Rav Asi is more strict than Rav, correct? And then we said that Rav actually, at one point, there was an actual case, an actual occurrence, uvda, right? That Rav could have, it was at its proper time, and Rav could have just read Megillah on his own, And he said, no, I'm going to have to try to follow Rav Asi's opinion. So now let's look at footnote 4. Beryl, you there? Footnote 4.
Rav Asi holds that for the sake of publicizing the miracle, one should endeavor to assemble 10 people for the Megillah reading. However, if 10 people cannot be found, one should go ahead and read the Megillah anyway. Rashi, it's a whole...
Etc., etc., etc. Go to the next column. They state
that even according to Rav Asi, reading the Megillah without 10 people in attendance constitutes fulfillment of the mitzvah. Rav Asi's ruling merely represents an obligation to try and find 10 people to attend the reading.
Okay, so that's
Other
an answer.
Rishonim-
Wait. Thank you. So that's an answer to what David just asked. So according to this way of understanding Rav Asi, this is what's called lechatchila, right? The best approach, best practices. This is what we prefer. The preferred approach is you must do everything you can to try to get a minyan for the reading of the Megillah always, whether it's on the designated day or whether it's on some other day. Always get 10 people when you're reading the Megillah. But what if you can't? What if you're in Anchorage, Alaska? The answer is if you can't, you can't. So,
But isn't that a contradiction of what he says
not at all.
before?
What he's saying is this is the preferable way to do it. Knock yourself out. If you can do it, great. But if circumstances are such that you can't get a minyan, then do the next best thing, right? And read the Megillah without a minyan. It's better to read the Megillah without a minyan than not to read the Megillah at all.
But this is an interpretation, correct? Of
So
what
now, that's the interpretation of Rav Asi according to Rashi and a number of other authorities.
Okay.
Now, we go to the next paragraph.
Yes.
Footnote. And here, Beryl now will continue. Thank you for being patient with my interruptions. Now, other Rishonim.
Other Rishonim disagree. In their view, Rav Asi invalidates a Megillah reading that took place without 10 people in attendance.
Next paragraph.
This difference pertains only to the opinion of Rav Asi. As far as Rav's view is concerned, all agree that one is not obliged to even attempt to assemble 10 people.
However,
Rav does concede that the presence of 10 is ideal.
okay. So this is now the way some people are reading this disagreement. And according to this way of reading it, Rav Asi is saying, no, the very nature of reading the Megillah depends on a public reading. Just like if you can't get a minyan, you don't read Torah. In Anchorage, Alaska, they're not going to be able to read Torah with 8 people, period. You can't do it. So according to this way of understanding Rav Asi, there is no Megillah reading without a minyan. And then Rav was deferring, even though Rav disagreed with Rav Asi. Rav said, well, Rav Asi is such a great scholar, I don't want to pick a fight with him. And what do I lose if I get a minyan? I'll get a minyan. Of course, it's a good thing. It's an ideal thing to have a minyan. So even though I could have put my foot down and shown everybody that I disagree with Rav Asi, I'm not going to make a public stink about this. And I'm going to have a minyan for reading the Megillah, even though I could have gotten away without it. That's the story that we have. Okay, so, and of
Rabbi.
course, one second. And of course, the way of understanding that deference to Rav Asi is also open to interpretation. If Rav is Rav giving in, is Rav saying, well, Rav Asi is a greater authority, so his position is right? Or is this a kind of a menschy or even political kind of thing that he's doing for the moment? You could read it either way. Yeah, Sylvia.
Rabbi, all right, going back to the concept of minyan and to our current day, suppose we are in severe lockdown during the high holidays. What would we expect to have happen to services?
So this is being discussed as we speak, so to speak. How do you like that for a bunch of phrases put together?
Speak.
Right. This is all being contemplated, and the question of how to do the best we can is being explored in various ways. But the bottom line is, if we don't have 10 people in one room together, there are certain parts of the service that will not be recited. We won't be able to do it. Just like we don't have it every Shabbat.
Can you have
We don't have Torah reading every Shabbat.
Can you have a Haftorah?
Not with blessings. You can read anything you want. The Torah is the Torah. The prophet is part of reading Torah, and you can study Torah and read Torah as much as you want, and that's beautiful and it's great. On sharing Shabbat, I read a couple of verses from the Torah just because I want to mark that this is the Shabbat that we should have been reading the Torah, and this would have been the Torah portion. Sometimes I read a little piece from the Haftarah also, but that's not the communal reading of Torah and Haftarah with blessings. And I deal with all of this in the statement. So we're going to do the best we can. If it's safe, and that's a huge if, and safe should be in absolutely huge, bold, big capital letters. As I say in the statement, safety is first. Keeping people safe and alive is the primary mitzvah here. And if we can't do that by having our traditional approach to prayers and reading Torah and so on, then we not only won't do it, we should not do it. We're forbidden to do actions that will bring people into dangerous situations that could be life-threatening. So that pushes aside all of those obligations. And when you're not obligated, then you're not obligated. So you're only obligated to do what you can do and what you should do. I mean, that's a tautology. But if you're not capable of doing it, then you can't. Let's say, God forbid, you're very sick yourself. Then you can't go to shul. You're not obligated to go to shul when you can't. So obligations depend on reality. And the reality has to be respected. Geraldine.
When I had my first heart attack in 2004, I came home from the hospital the Shabbos, it was Friday afternoon, and Saturday night was Purim. And of course, I wasn't allowed to go to the Megillah reading. And after the Megillah reading at shul, the rabbi came to my home with his Megillah, and he chanted the Megillah for me at home.
Beautiful, very nice.
We were not a minion though, but
right.
The next morning I read it myself. I did in English. I read it in English. Is that okay according to what we just talked about?
So it's better than that. You've done something beautiful, and it's studying Torah, and it's showing your solidarity with the rest of the community. So all of those things are beautiful and sacred acts.
Yeah.
You weren't obligated to read Megillah when you didn't have it.
Yeah. I didn't read the Megillah. I didn't go to services this past Purim because it was right around the time.
Right. A lot of people didn't show up. You noticed. Yes. It was right at the cusp of what we closed down.
Yeah. But what I did not know is I should have read it alone at home. That would have been a good thing to do, or the right thing to do.
All right. Well, we learn as we go along.
Yes.
And God willing, next year we won't have to worry about this.
See, I did the same thing. I didn't go to the shul, but I read it at home.
But I want to bring up something that we talk about. Every year we recognize this. On Kol Nidre night, we have a special prayer that we have somebody read on behalf of everybody who can't fast because of medical reasons, because that's the Torah says fast on Yom Kippur. It's right there in the Torah. All these other things that we're talking about, Megillah is not in the Torah. All these other things are not in the Torah. The Torah is very, very adamant that you have to fast on Yom Kippur, and not only that, you fast on Shabbos Yom Kippur. If we don't push off Yom Kippur if it's on Shabbat to some other day. That's it. This is non-negotiable. And guess what? If it's not going to be safe for you to fast, you don't fast, period. So safety is first.
Geraldine's case of saying it on her own or with the rabbi, not a minion, is the one that is contemplated, I think, in this particular Gemara, where somebody is saying it in private without a minion, but it's in its proper time.
But there are other considerations as well. The reading of the Megillah is mandated to be from the parchment. That's what Megillah reading is officially supposed to be. So the idea is that you read the Megillah on your own, but from a parchment. Reading Megillah from a book is learning Torah, but it's not officially reading the Megillah. It's not reading the scroll. Just like Torah reading from the scroll and not reading from the Chumash. It's the same words, right? But the vehicle is a different vehicle. And the meaning is given in very specific ways to those two different vehicles. When you're just reading from any published material or even handwritten a manuscript, but you're writing it on your own pages and so on, it's not meant to be a real Torah scroll. So those are words of Torah, and those are to be studied and cherished, but they're not a Torah scroll. They're not the Torah scroll that we keep from generation to generation for thousands of years as the specific community artifact. Same thing with Megillah. That's what is so astounding about the rabbinic requirement. We're going to make a Megillah be just like a Torah scroll. We're going to require it to be not just from a booklet, but from a parchment with a scribe who has written every letter, every word, and so on, just like a Torah scroll. Right? So that's the other dimension that's assumed here. Okay. Let's continue now with So I wanted to also just touch on this. What significance should we attribute to Rav following Rav Ashi? When Rav gives up his own opinion and follows the more strict opinion of Rav Asi, what does that teach us? So let's look at footnote number 5. Beryl, you back? It's all yours. Footnote number 5.
Although Rav himself followed Rav Asi's ruling, we rule in accordance with Rav that one is not obligated to search for 10 people. Rav's action was a stringency taken upon himself and was not intended as a requirement for others.
So stop here.
Other
Thank you. Stop for a
however-
second. Stop for a second, please. So just this point here, I want to just add that we already know, we're familiar with the way the Talmud works. The Talmud almost never tells us in an argument who's right and who's wrong, or how we should decide the law. It gives us all kinds of discussions. It gives us all kinds of debates. And this one says yes, and this one says no. And then it just leaves it like that. And then if somebody wants to say, well, what am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to follow? The Talmud is not concerned with telling us how to work this out. So subsequent generations had to figure this out. Subsequent generations had to say it's good for study purposes to know every single perspective, but in the end, what are we going to choose to do? We can't do two contradictory opinions. We have to follow one or the other. So there are all kinds of rules that have been developed or guidelines to try to help us decide who we follow and who we don't in different debates. And I'm not going to go through all of them. But one of the ways that later tradition tried to decide things was by following stories in the Talmud. If in the Talmud, after we have a recorded debate, we then have a story which shows us that the rabbis followed opinion A instead of opinion B, then that shows that opinion A is better. So we should follow opinion A. And often that's how we decide what the halacha is. So here we have a case where we have opinion A is Rav, opinion B is Ravasi. They disagree. And then opinion A, Rav, gives in and follows Ravasi. So maybe this shows us that over time, Rav gave in altogether. So this first paragraph is saying, no, we have decided that that's not the case. That's not how we evaluate this. We're reading this story as a very specific case that happened in the moment, and it was simply a collegial kind of gesture that Rav was trying to be nice to Ravasi and respectful, and he didn't want to get into a whole big thing about it, but Rav still published his own opinion in disagreement, right? And since he could find a minion, he said, so what am I losing? Okay, I'll find a minion. I'll follow Ravasi. Okay, so that's the way some people read this. Now back to Beryl. Other authorities, however.
Sorry, wait for the airplane to go by. Other authorities, however, adopt the opinion of Rav Asi. According to this view, the halacha depends on two versions of Rav Asi's opinion presented in the preceding note, Orach Hayim. Rules that one must endeavor to gather 10 people, but if that is impossible, one reads the Megillah alone. Bahag holds that without 10 people, the reading is invalid. In the case of reading in an irregular time, where Rav concedes to Rav Asi that the presence of 10 is required, the halacha is again dependent on the two versions of Rav Asi's opinion. Shar Hatzinyan.
Skip all of that and go to the next paragraph.
Since the presence of 10 is only for the purpose of publicity of the miracle, even people who have already fulfilled their obligation can be included.
Okay. So again, all of the ways that we read the Talmud before that we discussed then have an impact on what we actually decide is the opinion that we should follow. And you have a more lenient opinion and you have a more stringent opinion, all depending on how you evaluate the text that we just went through. Overall, the accepted opinion in terms of the consensus of Jewish practice today is that one discharges one's obligation individually as well. That if you don't have a minyan, we don't disqualify your reading of the Megillah. However, of course, if you're reading the Megillah with all of the other conditions fulfilled. So, okay. Now we're up to a clarification. And we're at Rav concedes. Back in the text of the Gemara, left-hand side toward the bottom of the column, Rav concedes that when?
Rav concedes that when the Megillah is read in an irregular time, 10 people must be in attendance. The Gemara notes that this conflicts with another statement of Rav. And did Rav really say that? But Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, said in the name of Rav, if Purim falls on the Sabbath, the eve of the Sabbath, Friday, is the proper time for reading the Megillah. The Gemara first seeks to clarify the meaning of this statement. How can Rav say the eve of the Sabbath is their proper time for reading the Megillah? But the Sabbath is their proper time.
But the Sabbath is their proper time, not the eve of the Sabbath. Why? If Purim falls, this is the statement, right? The statement is when Purim falls on Shabbos, then the proper time for reading Megillah is Friday. No, the proper time for reading Megillah is Shabbos. But then, of course, we have a problem that we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos, so then we have to put it off. But why is Rav being so categorical as to say that the perfectly good time for reading the Megillah is Erev Shabbos, right? But the Sabbath is their proper time. Continue. The eve of
Once I figure out.
Like 5 lines from the top.
5
That's
lines
the
from the top.
6
Okay.
lines. But the Sabbath is
The
there.
eve, But the Sabbath is their proper time. The eve of the Sabbath is merely the day to which the reading is shifted because the Megillah cannot be read on the Sabbath. The Gemara explains the statement. Surely then, this is what Rav meant. When the Megillah is read in a time other than their proper time, it is the same as if it is read in their proper time. Just as when the Megillah is read in their proper time, it is read even privately. So too, when the Megillah is read in a time other than their proper time, it is read even privately.
Okay, so now what the Gemara first has done is try to understand this categorical statement of Rav. Rav seems to be making an extra effort to tell us that when the Megillah reading is shifted from its original time, let's use that word, original time, which would have been Shabbos, but it can't be read on its original time. When it's shifted to another time, such as Friday, then we should consider that. We shouldn't have bad feelings about it. We shouldn't feel guilty about it. We shouldn't think that this is second best. That's the proper time. Once we shifted it, that's the proper time. We should treat it as the proper time. So if that's his statement, then according to the way we now understand it, his Rav is encouraging everyone to treat Friday as if it were the original time that reading had to be done. Don't have second thoughts about this. This is a perfectly good time to read Megillah. So therefore, just read the Megillah as you would normally. Continue observing Purim on this day as you would any other day. So if that's the case, then by implication, we can read the Megillah individually. But that's not what Rav said, according to you. According to you, Rav said, wait, once we shift out of the actual original date, there is a difference. It's not completely the proper time. So which does Rav mean? Is it absolutely 100% the proper time when it's shifted? Or do we start making distinctions and saying, no, once we shift, there's a difference. So we have what seems to be a contradictory statement. Now we continue. According to this explanation,
of Rav's statement, it contradicts what Rav said above, that when the Megillah is read in an irregular time, the presence of 10 people is required. The Gemara resolves the contradiction by explaining the second statement of Rav in a different manner. No, your understanding of Rav's second statement is incorrect. In regard to the Megillah reading on Friday, Rav agrees that it is performed with 10 people in attendance. What then did Rav mean in saying the Sabbath Eve is their proper time? His intent was to reject the opinion of Rabbi, who said that since when the 14th falls on the Sabbath, unwalled towns are anyway shifted from their regular spot, i.e., they do not read on the 14th, for it is a Sabbath. They may as well be shifted to the day of assembly, Thursday. Rav therefore teaches us that the Sabbath Eve, Friday, is their proper time, and not Thursday, as Rabbi has said.
okay. So now what we have is the avoiding of a contradiction in Rav's teachings by recontextualizing one of the two statements we have on behalf of Rav. The second statement that we have from Rav is a little bit enigmatic. It's a little bit hard to understand. It's a kind of just a short abstract statement that when we push Purim out of Shabbos to Friday, that's perfectly all right. We should consider that its proper time. The Gemara is now pointing out that this is a free-floating statement. People have this as a quote, but as many people have complained about journalists in general, I've been quoted out of context. Of course I said that, but you didn't hear when I said it, how I said it, what was the flow of what I was saying, what was the argument that I was trying to address. So this is a problem that the Gemara acknowledges. We have free-floating statements of sages that are memorized and that are circulated and transmitted from one student to another, from one community to another. And sometimes the original context of that statement might be lost or confused. So even though here look, it's clear. We're talking about, we have certain, parts of this context that we know. We're talking about the conversation is about Purim was supposed to be on Shabbos and it's not. We can't read the Megillah on Shabbos. We're going to read it now on another day. So the fact that Rav says, and that day should be treated as a perfectly good day, with regard to what? Our first assumption was that means that he's saying when you read the Megillah, it's just as good as when you're reading it on the real day, on the original day. And all of the rules apply in both cases. Now we're saying, no, that's not what he means at all. You're taking his statement completely out of context. His statement was simply meant to be an aggressive rejection of a statement about something else. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that once the Megillah is not going to be read on Shabbos, don't read it on Friday. Read it on Thursday. And then Rav said, sorry, with all due respect, when Shabbos is Purim, then Friday is the proper time. So depending on who he's arguing with, and depending on what the topic is that he's trying to clarify, the very, very identical words could be understood in very different ways. So now the Gemara says, since we have an explicit report that Rav actually bumped heads with Rav Asi about the need for a minyan, whether you need a minyan or not, we're not going to take this other, more generalized statement of Rav and make it into a contradiction with his other statement. We're going to reconcile both statements by saying this statement is about a minyan and this statement is about something else, and they don't disagree. Of course, once we have the statement, once we have the story that Rav followed Rav Asi, we could theoretically say, so the first statement that he said was when he was arguing with Rav Asi. The second statement that he said was after he gave in to Rav Asi. And that's why there's a contradiction. He contradicts himself because he actually changed his mind. But that's not what the Gemara wants to do. What the Gemara wants to do is to keep Rav's original opinion that you don't need a minyan on days that are the proper time. They want to preserve that. Why would they want to preserve that opinion? Because it allows for more people reading the Megillah. Because it makes it easier for people to read the Megillah. If you don't need a minyan, then it's easier for people to discharge their obligation. So to keep that opinion alive, the Gemara shows that you need to read the other record of Rav's opinion to be applying to something completely different. Okay, we've reached the Mishnah. Any comments, any other questions or insights that people have before we move on to the next Mishnah? All right, good. So now we're on 5A2. We have a nice sized Mishnah here. And some of this should be very familiar because it's already been appealed to in our discussions earlier. But here is the Mishnah itself that predates, of course, the Talmudic discussions that we've had until now. So Beryl, are you still able to read?
Sorry, I don't know if you froze or I froze, so I just went out and came back in.
Okay, now
the
you're
previous,
back. Okay, except
the
now all I
previous
see is a
mis-
big B. I don't see you anymore.
Oh, I'm gone.
Yeah,
I
mean,
can
I hear
see
you.
you. I can
I
see
hear
you.
you. And not only
Nope,
that, I
now you're
hear you,
gone.
but it says that you're muted. I don't get
Yeah.
it.
The rest of us see a B.
Can you hear me?
We see you.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Okay. Yes.
Good.
Okay.
All right, let's
The
go.
previous The previous Mishnah has stated that large towns read the Megillah on the 14th of Adar and do not advance to the previous day of assembly. This Mishnah begins by defining large towns. What is considered a large town? Any in which there are 10 unoccupied men. If there are less than this amount, it is considered a village, and it may advance its day of reading to the previous day of assembly. It was regarding, I hope I'm
Wait.
still here.
I got thrown out of this thing and I had to rejoin also. So I apologize. I want to stop us right here and do a little review for a second. Who would like to remind us of some of the different ways that we've understood what these 10 people are all about? Who are these 10 people? Anybody remember?
Was this the part about who is a farmer and who isn't?
No. These are the people who are around the shul all the time. Can always make the minyan. They're the retired people who are there.
Right. So that's the way that's one way of understanding that. We went through a couple of understandings of this context, of this concept. One way of understanding it is that if there are enough people in town, so that there's some people that are available at any given day to make the minyan because they're not busy, then that shows that this is a serious Jewish community. This is a big town. So it's about the fact that, okay, we can be pretty sure that there are plenty of people, that the retirees that are around. That's one way to read it. Another way to read it is, no, this is a town that actually makes it its business to have people on call because they're getting paid to be on call. Right? Some people may remember in the old days that in some struggling shuls, they used to pay somebody to make a minyan. They only had, let's say, 9 people to count on, and then they would pay somebody to show up because otherwise they wouldn't be able to have a minyan. So in this reading, this is what shows us that this is a pretty substantial congregation because they already have a budget that makes sure that there are people to make the minyan. Going further than that, some read it as these are 10 functionaries of the community. These are the 3 people that run around collecting the tzedakah. This is the Beit Din people. So altogether, when you count up all the people that are supposed to be dealing with the official needs of the community, you get 10 people who are on the payroll of the community to teach, to adjudicate, to run the mikveh, to make sure that people have the welfare needs that they need. So it comes out to be 10 people, and that's it. So basically, roughly speaking, we have 2 ways of looking at it. Either it's actually a concerted effort on the part of a community to make sure that 10 people are constantly there to support the community, or it's a kind of an assumption. It's a big enough community so that we can pretty much assume that there won't be a problem with a minyan, that they'll make a minyan. We know that they make a minyan every time. Again, realistically speaking, our shul wouldn't qualify. Sometimes we make a minyan and sometimes we don't make a minyan. This is saying, no, but if we had another 100 members, we'd always make a minyan. So that's the idea of a big community. It's a big enough community so that worrying about a minyan is not something that we deal with. Lynn.
I have both what you sent us, but I'm also on Safaria, and it says, however, if there are few, talking about the idlers, they call them idlers in this translation.
Idlers, yeah.
And then, however, if there are fewer than that, it is considered a village, even if it has many inhabitants. So in this translation, it says, doesn't matter how many people you have that live there, if you don't have 10 people hanging around, you don't count.
Or if you can't count on 10 people showing up, would be the other way to read it, right? Yes, there are 40,000 people in Montclair, but Shomrei is not always going to be able to guarantee you a minyan, right? Okay, good. So now we're continuing with the next paragraph. Okay, Beryl, you back?
It was regarding these times of Megillah reading that the sages said that at times we advance the mitzvah observance to an earlier day, but we do not postpone it to a later day. But the time of the wood offering of Kahanim and the fast of Tish B'Av, the Hagigah offering. The what?
Chagiga.
I'm sorry. There's an airplane and I can't hear anyway.
I can hear it a little bit. Chagiga comes from the word chag. Chag means holiday. Chagiga is the sacrifice done on a holiday. So chagiga.
Hagigah, the Hagigah offering and the assembly are at times postponed and not advanced to an earlier time.
Okay, so here the Mishnah is saying there's a distinction between the way that we treat Megillah and the way that we treat certain other practices and ceremonies and observances that we are required to do. And when they fall on Shabbat, we don't do it on Shabbat. So what do? So the Mishnah says there's a difference. Megillah is pushed earlier. That's all of our conversations about doing it on the 11th and the 12th and the 13th. All of those dates, we push it earlier. However, these other mitzvot, we actually postpone. We don't push them earlier, we push them later. So what are they? The examples are, first of all, the one that they give us is the wood offering, Atzei Kohanim, the wood of the priests. So this is, it's already mentioned in later books of the Torah when the Jewish people came back to the land of Israel for the Second Commonwealth, and we needed to restock the new temple, the second temple that was built. And we talked about this actually in Tractate Ta'anit, in our previous tractate that we studied together in Talmud. There were special days that families that had donated the supply of trees that were needed to burn on the altar, to burn the sacrifices on the altar. This was the oil bill. This is the gas and electric. So the trees that were donated to the temple for burning the sacrifices were a heritage of different families that took on the privilege of supplying the temple, and they had specific dates that they celebrated. This was, we give our trees on the 15th of Av. We give our trees, our wood on the 7th of Tammuz or whatever. So all of those days became days of celebration. And the family that was in charge of giving that donation would come to the temple and bring their trees and give a Thanksgiving offering in the temple, but it wasn't done on Shabbat. So if the calendar date of their offering was on Shabbat, it was not done on Shabbat. When was it done? It wasn't done earlier. It was done later, right? So that's the first example. The second example is Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av is the fast day for mourning the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. And it happens in our own time as well. We don't have, obviously, the offerings of the wood for the temple, but we do have a Tisha B'Av observance, and sometimes Tisha B'Av happens on Shabbos. So Shabbat, you're not allowed to fast on Shabbat, except, as I mentioned before, for Yom Kippur. But all other fast days that fall on Shabbat, you can't fast on Shabbat. You're not allowed. It's a desecration of the enjoyment of Shabbat. So if you don't do it on Shabbat, when do you do it? The Mishnah says you do it later, not earlier. You don't push it back to Friday or Thursday. You push it off from Shabbat to the next day. So you postpone it. Then you have the Chagigah offering. The Chagigah offering comes from Chag, like Chag Sameach, happy holidays. The Chagigah offering is the offering that each Israelite brought when they made pilgrimage to the temple on the 3 pilgrimage holidays: Chag HaMatzot, Chag HaShavuot, Chag HaSukkot. So on those Chag celebrations, you brought an offering to celebrate the holiday. It's called a Chagigah offering. It was an offering that basically was the way that you catered your meal. You brought the offering, you gave a little piece on the altar, and the rest of it was part of your celebration of the holiday with whatever guests and family that you wanted to have the meal together with. But that offering was supposed to be brought on the sacrificial altar in the temple. What happens if Yom Tov falls on Shabbat? The answer is you don't bring your offering on Shabbat. Your offering gets pushed off and it's offered when it's not Yom Tov and Shabbat. So that's the next example. And finally, we have Hakel. Hakel is translated here as assembly, or it really means bring together, right? Assemble. The word kahal is congregation. Kihila, I mentioned earlier. Kihila Kedosha, a holy congregation. A kahal is literally a congregating of people together, a bringing people together. And this is a Torah commandment that every 7 years, we've had some discussion of it again, I think in Ta'anit, every 7 years, and the Torah says, when should you do it? You should do it on the holiday of Sukkot after Shemitah, after the sabbatical year. So you've got your cycle of 7 years. The 7th year is Shemitah, and then you've got Rosh Hashanah of the next year, the next cycle, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. When you have Sukkot, at that point, you have what's called Hakel. You bring everybody together, and what do? You read the Torah. This is the basis for all subsequent Torah reading. All Torah reading that we do in our tradition comes out of the Torah's one mandated Torah reading that happens once every 7 years, not once every week, not once every 3 days, but once every 7 years. The Torah says we have to read the Torah hakel, in a congregation, in public, not individually. Okay, I'm back. I just got kicked out again. So I'm sorry. So for Hakel, again, if the day of the holiday, when you're supposed to read the Torah, falls out to be Shabbat, we don't read the Torah on Shabbat, but we read it the next day. And if you read in the notes, which I'm trying to summarize for you, and so that we're not going to read them, what happened was that there was a big, gigantic bima, also known as a duchan. That's the word that we use for the priests who used to go up onto the platform. A big wooden platform was built in the courtyard of the temple, and the king would be invited to come into the courtyard and stand above the people, sit above the people on this duchan, on this platform, and then read from the Torah. The reading was from the book of Dvarim, the book of Deuteronomy. So that very ceremonial happening, where literally hundreds of thousands, if not more people, by the end of the Second Temple, we have eyewitness reports that there were tons and tons and tons of people who came to Jerusalem for these pilgrimage holidays. People not only from the land of Israel, but Jews from everywhere. I've mentioned Philo, who lived in Alexandria in Egypt. He tells us his personal experience of going to Jerusalem on pilgrimage. So people from all over the diaspora would make it their business to come in, and it was a massive, massive kind of showing of people. the kind of exciting masses that we see today when we look at sometimes demonstrations or marches, hopefully for things that we believe in. So that happened for Hakel, and it was pushed off, the building of the platform, and then the reading of the Torah was not done on Shabbat. It was done the next day. So all of these, the Mishnah points out, are different from Megillah, or the opposite. Megillah is actually the one exception to what generally seems to be a rule of if you don't do it on Shabbat, you wait and you do it later, right? Megillah comes earlier. Okay. Carol, back to you.
Even though the sages said that we advance, but do not postpone the Megillah reading, it is permitted to engage in eulogies, fasts, and gifts to the poor on those earlier days on which the Megillah is actually read. Rav Yehuda now clarifies.
Oh, wait. Thank you. Good. One piece at a time. So now we will read a short note. Read, please, 17.
Okay, let me find it.
Uh,
Those who read the Megillah on...
Wait. 16 and then 17.
16. Eulogies and fasts are prohibited on Purim, as the Gemara below derives from a verse in the Megillah. But on these earlier days, they are permitted, even if the Megillah is actually read on them.
17. That is,
those
who read
the Megillah on these earlier days can also discharge their obligation to give gifts to the poor on those days. However, they cannot discharge their obligation of sending portions to a friend on the earlier days, since that obligation is connected to the Purim meal, about which we learned above, beginning of this Amud, that the villagers too celebrate it on Purim Day.
Okay, so this is the back and forth about, well, so when is Purim? If we take Rab's statement before, when Purim falls on Shabbat, then Friday is the real time. It's the right time. It's the right time, but yet it's not the right time. So in what ways is the exchange of dates establishing an alternative Purim? And in what ways do we say, no, we're doing certain things, but it's not really Purim, and we have to wait for Purim for other things? Or the opposite. If we make Purim come early, then what about all of the prohibitions that apply on Purim? So those prohibitions also apply on this extra day that we established as being the advanced day for Purim? So the answer is yes and no. The answer is we make certain distinctions about this. It is permitted to engage in eulogies and fasts and to give gifts to the poor on the early day, right? It should be on the 14th, and we're actually celebrating Purim on the 13th or the 12th or the 11th, or however it comes out. So on that alternative date, is it really, really Purim? The answer is, well, if unfortunately there's a funeral, then have a full funeral. Don't say, no, it's Purim, it's a day of rejoicing, and you can't have a eulogy. You can have a eulogy, right? If you have to have a fast because of some terrible trouble that's happening in the local community, that's the whole discussion of our previous tractate. If there's some kind of terrible catastrophe or crisis, then it's not Purim for that purpose. Yes, we have to acknowledge that we have to meet the crisis, and it's not fully Purim. On the other hand, when it comes to the poor people who look forward to getting gifts on Purim, then don't say, oh no, we're not giving you gifts today. It's not really Purim. For the poor people, we say, no, don't make them wait extra. For the poor people, we say, give them the gifts earlier rather than pushing them off for some other time.
It seems to me that it would have to be on the day that it's celebrated rather than the 14th, because the 14th is Shabbat. You're not going to give gifts. You're not going to fast anyway on Shabbat.
So yes, fasting for sure you're not. But as it says in the note, for instance, the meal you could have on Shabbat, and you could use the meal as also a gift to the poor, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be $1 million check. You could actually give them a gift that's not cash. That's not something that violates Shabbat. But nevertheless, we say, since they have such a real need, let's not put it off at all. Let's not get technical about it. Your own celebration, your own friends, do it on the real day of Purim, right? But don't make the poor people suffer one extra minute. Make sure that they get what they need. Okay, and that's, I think, a good place for us to stop for today. And hopefully we'll continue with this next week. Okay?
Thank you.
Bye, Gesund, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Shavua tov.
Bye-bye.